I think Jay Powell has become somewhat of a tightrope walker acrobat over the last really few years, but particularly in the last few months. And so I suspect we'll see him show those same attributes. I think what's really going to be notable in this week's FOMC kind of sense making is that last FOMC meeting, we saw them really just go up right to the line of hinting at stagflation, of slow growth, increasing unemployment, and increasing prices. And nothing since 6 weeks ago has gotten really better. We've gotten new data out showing really slowed growth. We've gotten a jobs report that was a little bit hard to make sense of, but certainly we are seeing weakening in the labor market. And we got an inflation print that still shows extremely sticky prices, and combined that with the kind of policy outlook with a trade war, or really many trade wars all at the same time, threatening both the labor market and prices and ultimately growth. I think we will see the Fed sort of hint even more at stagflation this afternoon.
Well, if the hint is going to be stagflation, knowing that in theory monetary policy would step in if there were signs of an outright recession, Liz, when do you expect those signs to materialize? And knowing that the Fed wants to wait to have hard data in hand, isn't just looking at the soft data, can they actually act in a timely enough manner to avert a recession in its entirety, or can they only act to bring us out of one if it occurs?
I think the question is actually, what can their actions do to avoid a recession at all? If you do have economic conditions where prices are increasing, growth is slowing, and unemployment is rising, the Fed has really one blunt instrument to be able to change the macroeconomic picture. So it feels a little bit like we have, a Phillips screw and a flathead screwdriver with this conundrum. So I think the question is not necessarily when will the Fed start to act, but really if the Fed acts, will it do anything to actually soften the blow of this economic calamity that the president has really created on his own?
Well, and when we consider the president's own words about what could happen economically, he seems to be talking a lot, Liz, about what will happen through the lens of children's dolls, the availability of them, whether kids will be able to get as many and how much they will cost. But I do wonder, if it's not dolls, where you expect within the economy these shortages and potentially either empty shelves or higher prices for items that are shelved will start showing up in a more material way. How close are we to that moment, considering what we're seeing in cargo volumes coming over from China?
Yeah, I mean, we at the Port of LA, we are now at a 50% reduction year over year. Just last week, Gene Soroka, the head of the LA port, was saying 35%. So the picture is grim. JP Morgan is expecting 70 to 80% declines in shipments from China. I think the president was kind of making an offhand comment when he said that the children might have 2 dolls instead of 30. And what he might want to turn his attention to is, the doll makers have said all of the hair for those dolls comes from China. And so it's not how many dolls they'll have, but if they'll be bald. But I think on a more serious note, 98% of car seats, 97% of strollers, 90% of first aid kits all come from China. These are essentials that parents cannot go without. And as we head into the summer season, more than 90% of charcoal grills and fireworks come from China. As these businesses we saw in the trade imbalance data earlier today that there was a massive spike in imports kind of leading up to Liberation Day. These businesses are rapidly spending through their inventories so that they don't have to pay the tariff on new shipments. Eventually, they will run out of those inventories, and families across the country could see essentials not on shelf for them to be able to purchase pretty soon here. I'd say for most businesses, they typically have between 2 and 4 months worth of stock supplied. Maybe some larger businesses were able to stretch that to about 6, but there's only so much stockpiling you can do.
Well, and as the Fed has said repeatedly, and as you were alluding to earlier, Liz, there's not much the Fed can do to address supply shortages. Their ability to impact the supply and demand dynamics is focused solely on the demand side. And I wonder, as we consider the interest rate mechanism and its abilities to influence demand, if actually what we could see is consumers themselves balking in the face of higher prices, bringing their own demand and consumption capacity down, and in some sense actually making it easier for the Federal Reserve if it's consumers that bring their own demand down, making the Fed not necessarily need to have tighter policy. Does that make sense?
It's possible. I mean, we've seen this a little bit from some of the fast food earnings reports out last week. You know, McDonald's, Chipotle are all reporting decreases. We'll see Disney this week. But by and large, I think consumers and businesses are really trying to put as many big decisions on ice as possible. We don't know what the president will announce tomorrow, if it'll be 1,045% tariffs on China or 0% tariffs on China. It is really hard as a consumer to make a decision about large purchases. Do I buy a car now because I expect that the prices will only continue to go up and my car might be on the verge of breaking down? But you had Ford announce large increases in their prices. As families are planning, vacations for this summer, they're rethinking, is now really the right time to spend a couple $1,000s, or should we wait it out and see what happens with our jobs or with our expenses? And as businesses are considering hiring decisions, they're, really thinking about, should I add a full-time employee right now, or can I make do with the staff I have? So I really think what we're going to see is largely an economy on ice. And the question is, as that ice melts, is the economy spoiling or flourishing? And I think it really remains to be seen, and the president's actions will have a large effect on those. And it's not totally clear what's coming out of this White House. The president alleges that there's hundreds of deals he could announce, but he's not announcing any. I know Treasury Secretary Bessent and USTR Jameson Greer are traveling to Switzerland this weekend to meet with the Chinese. I'm not sure how much we can expect movement there. And so I really think it depends on how the president keeps course on his erratic trade agenda as to what happens with American consumers and businesses.
All right, Liz, we just have a minute left here, but if you had the chance to ask Chairman Powell a question at the press conference today, what would he need to answer for?
I think the better question to ask him is about his Grateful Dead fanfare. But I think what I'd really want to know the answer is, if faced with increasing unemployment and increasing prices, what tools are in the bottom of the depths of the toolbox of the Fed to make sure that American families do not pay the price of this president's erratic economic agenda? And I'm not sure he has an answer for that.